So hi, yeah, just a little game design follow-up. I've been doing a lot of work recently, doing some role-playing game design for some companies, which is really nice. So hopefully they come out in September, I think. Very keen to see those out. But um, for those of you who know them, there is a British publisher of military history books called Helion. You might be familiar with like the Osprey Men at Arms books and so on. Osprey are they're useful, but they're fairly lightweight. Helion publishes in a similar sort of paperback format, but their stuff has a lot more gravitas. They publish a lot of non-English authors, so you'll find French history books and so on written, by French people, and a lot more detail. A lot more meat to them. Not quite so heavy on paintings and the color plates in the middle, but illustrated, of course. I am doing a set of miniatures rules which will be published by Helion. They asked me if I could do them, a set of miniatures rules for a sort of a skirmish scale for Sengoku period Japan, which is the Warring States period. If you watch like a cool Kurosawa film, that's usually when it's set, the 16th century. Okay, so yes, I am the person definitely to ask to do this. So if you've watched the games reviews that I've done, you might have realized, I'm a bit of a Japanese history enthusiast, and I played Bushido sort of in early teenage days with my friend Damien. We were martial artists together. We were doing, we did a lot of jiu-jitsu and all this sort of stuff with us. But both of us, in many ways, kind of, me longer, but lived our lives as Bushido characters. So I ended up with like the Katori Shinto Ryu, which is one of the oldest Japanese sword schools. So yes, I learned Japanese longsword and short sword, the 12-foot spear, the naginata, then I've gone on into kendo and Ju-kendo and Tenkendo and all this kind of thing. But I'm an armor Nazi. I'm a obsessive about armor. This has been the thing I've researched my entire life. I'm one of those people that you walk through a museum, I can flick it. I can usually not only tell you exactly when and what city it was made in, but sometimes I can tell you who made it. It's just one of those. That's my trivia. That's my thing. It's a study, and a lot of Japanese history and so on has just been this thing. So okay, I can do this set of rules. It's a thrill. So yeah, the rules. What I've decided to do is make it have some very Japanese elements to it, and not just be the usual kind of yes, we've got our elements and we're all our dice. I've opted to make the game from the introduction of firearms. So this is like 1546 until like pretty much the fall of Osaka Castle in 1615. So technically, if we're getting technical about their Warring States period, it's kind of a broad period, but technically it probably ends about 1563, and after that's the Aguchi Momoyama period, and going into early Edo. But Warring States will do. After that, they stop the wars. So ding, up to there. So it's a very interesting period for those of you who aren't that read up on it. You've got it's in many ways it's a very vulgar period, because the warlords are very often, they're either peasants made good, or they are kind of the countrified descendants of governors and nobility that got pushed out of the capitals. And in order to sort of push their importance, they tend to adopt a level of ormolu that would not have been welcome in earlier, more sort of erudite Japanese society. So yeah, lots of things covered in gilt and lots of ostentation. So the armor, because it's having to be produced en masse, it's moved away from lamella, and initially there are styles which replicate with bands what had once been made up from bands of lamella, and then more solid and rigid styles start to appear. And then as as the yari becomes the spear becomes the dominant melee weapon, breastplates and so on have to become a lot stronger, because a spear thrust is amazingly good at getting through armor. There's an awful lot of power behind that one small point, with someone's body weight driving this huge shaft. So you're getting this evolution away from older Japanese arms forms. And then as guns come in, you do get very rigid breastplate styles, tub-sided cuirasses and solid cuirasses. And you do actually later on begin to get an attempt to make bulletproof armors. Now, the Portuguese brought guns in. They were guns of a type manufactured in their colonies in Macau. So it's a swivel matchlock, essentially an arquebus. However, once it got into Japanese hands, they began to make their own. They made very good ones. And I think what a lot of people miss is the fact that these guns evolve quite rapidly. In fact, in many ways, more rapidly than they evolve in the West. So the initial gun you get is a banzutsu. Zutsu means cylinder. The first one is the banzutsu, small cylinder, which is an arquebus. But as some armors start to appear that are somewhat bulletproof, very, very heavy iron armors, not everyone's going to wear these. They're fairly rare, to be honest. There was one warlord who tried equipping all of his armies with bulletproof armor, but in general, it's heavy stuff. However, someone comes up with an improved firearm, Juzutsu, which is middle cylinder, which is much longer and a much, much bigger bore. And no, man-portable armor can't keep that out. So essentially it's a musket. And comes in fairly quickly by, like, Sekigahara. A sizable proportion of their handheld firearms are Juzutsu. There's also the Samurai Zutsu, which is a very, very... It's a large bore, long barrel one again, but it's very, very, very finely crafted, and so essentially only samurai of pretty good means can really afford these things. There's also one of my favorites, the Ozutsu, great cylinder, and you will sometimes find these wonderful woodcuts of someone essentially lugging around a hand cannon. Literally, it's got a bore like a log of wood. And there were a couple of idiots who quite famously ran around with these enormous things. They're not fired from the shoulder, they'll kind of chonk them into the ground and fire them, but you've got these great wood prints. However, there is quite long one, inch bore, sometimes 2-inch bore, and these are huge, and they're often fired from a tripod, or you rest the barrel on the shoulder of someone else. So these aren't designed to be fired en masse. They're like an ultralight artillery piece and so on. So a lot of interesting stuff there. So the yari has replaced naganatas and so on because it's got the reach, it's got the penetration. It's easy to teach, but you can also sort of pack more people. Naginata needs a lot of space around it because it's got such a swirling sideways style to it. So yeah, it's fighting in a group. Yari is easier. And still got bows. The Japanese bow actually reaches its peak of development at this period, just as it's getting completely replaced by guns. And the guns were decisive. Not only armor penetration, they massively outranged bows, and they are quite accurate. So wherever bows encountered firearms, the firearms are sweeping the field. The Japanese actually invade Korea during this period in 1592 and again in 1596. It's a long war. And the Japanese guns are decisive there. They're literally obliterating Korean bow units and sweeping the field. And it's very useful in sieges because they're literally able to sweep the battlements clear with these firearms they've got. Very, very decisive. And you've got samurai generals actually writing home saying, when you send the reinforcements, make sure everyone's got a gun. No other weapon is necessary. They've really gotten to the stage where they're saying, forget the others. They weren't up against much in the way of battle cavalry over there, so unlike sort of English Civil War and so on in Korea and so on, you don't really have to worry that much about being charged by cavalry. In battle in Japan, where there are some shock cavalry, some yari wielding cavalry, yeah, you obviously do need the spear guys to help wield those off and shield the musketeers, and also effectively charge home against units that the musketeers have disordered and rattled. So the general idea behind this game is we are going to use individually based figures, but we're going to move them on movement templates. So the idea is the basic maneuver element is a template of 4 figures in a tray that moves around, and a unit is going to be 1 to 4 of these trays. I'm going to reel the clock back to the 70s. As you take damage to a unit, you're actually removing figures from it. If you've got stuff that's stuck to its base because you're using things for another system, fine, you can just put counters or whatever down next to it. Rally actions can rally and you can get figures back. But at the core of this thing, you design your ryu for your army. So your army is a Bushidan, a collection of warriors. You might be forces of a small warlord, a small family working for one of the bigger guys. You might be a swarm of bandits. You might be a pirate lord. The rules also allow you to play actions that are set in Korea and set in other places where Japanese troops are operating, like Thailand, like Wako, the Japanese pirates also fought against the Spanish in the Philippines, and also things like Okinawa and so on, the invasion of the Ryukyu Peninsula, all happened at this period. So there are non-Japanese forces that you can take. However, to design your ryu, you split things between the Japanese elements. Now, the Japanese had magical elements. The usual ones we're used to, so air, fire, earth, and water, to which they add wood and they add metal. And in these are depicted classically in Japan literally as a pentagram, which is what you got in this case. So water, air, fire, earth, wood, and in the middle you've got metal. So you've got a set number of points that you divide up between these elements, and these represent facets of the fighting style of your Bushidan, your ryu, your way. So you could decide to have a lot of fire element, and fire is ferocity, or a lot of earth element, and that is discipline. Metal is your endurance, your sturdiness. Wood is your prudence. Wind is speed. Water is cunning. So there are, say, for instance, a couple of families in Kyushu who were famous. Their fighting style that they developed is just smash things. This still exists as an old kobudo today, where these guys bundle up literally bundles of heavy sticks, and essentially their martial art is smashing these things with wooden swords that just look like a chunk of 4x2. You'll see these guys, they'll smash them, and this is how they actually fought. These guys just hacking their way forwards. We don't need a parry, we're just going to carve our way in. Their mon, their heraldic symbol, by the way, was a cross, and that's supposed to be where you've tried to parry this sword and it's driven it into your skull. So this is the line of your sword and the cut of their sword where it's gone crash. So, I think I'd rate those guys as pretty high on ferocity, but you get things like Tokugawa Ieyasu, who is renowned for his patience and his cunning, Oda Nobunaga, who's renowned for his ferocity, etc., etc., etc. So you can tool this thing up. Now, you get given counters for all of these, little elemental counters. When you control your troops on the field, these are the order counters that you give them. You place them face down. You check off for initiative, and then you activate one unit at a time. The type of order that you've turned over, elemental, you can use a default order. It can be a default normal move or normal sort of fire, but given the element, there's also special movement and fire orders that suit that element. So, for instance, if you put a discipline order on a unit that's firing, there are preserved in some of the old Japanese kobudo techniques which are based on their firearm fighting line techniques, and even the bow fighting line techniques, which adapted their tactics from muskets, where essentially it's lines that leapfrog each other. They can move forward or they can move back, and each missile team is working in pairs. And what's happening is one guy's rising up to he's kneeling. You're very, very low to the ground because they make themselves as little a target as possible. So essentially, rear rank fires, and then these guys flit forward and they go prone, and they've got this specialized style for reloading prone, so they just disappear. The previously reloaded group, they get up and they shoot, and they can do fire by introduction or extraduction like this. So that would be your discipline move for fire. So effectively it's giving you an extra protection for cover because of doing this. But there were also some techniques that were used, essentially very similar to French techniques under Louis XIV, where they're firing and charging, hoping that the enemy is going to stagger under the missile casualties, and you come out of the smoke. And volley fires. Also, like a prudent firing thing is where you keep a reserve line, so that you've always got reserve fire in case you are charged, etc. If you put swiftness on order movements, you will move faster. If you do a movement order that's ferocity, that's essentially an insane, crazy, blood-crazed charge. Big on ferocity, low on staying power, but you'll hit well. So now each of these elements in Japanese magic counter each other. So obviously water counters fire and fire counters wood, etc. So if you do like melee contact and you have contacted someone with a element that trumps the defending element, you get some extra dice in combat. And this stops you always playing the same thing, which is a major part of like Japanese swordsmanship and Japanese generalship. Don't do the same trick twice. Keep him guessing, keep a bag of tricks. So there's this elemental phase to it. Now these order chits, by the way, they are a resource that you're going to have to shepherd through the game. As you start off, you should have enough to have a choice of what kind of orders to give to your troops, and everything will be hunky-dory. However, if units become disordered, which they become disordered when they take missile fire or when they come out of a combat, they take more than one order chit to get moving. In addition, if you're hit by missile fire, it can halt your movement. You can keep some of these order chits in reserve and play one on a unit that has been halted due to missile fire so it can continue its movement. So you've got to start shepherding this. As you lose units, you will lose order chits as well. So you start withering away your options. The order chits and so on, resources, is at the core of the game. Trying to give that resource management and that sort of that game within a game. The rest of it is stuff that will be familiar to wargamers, cover and certain troops working well in different ways. Naginatas and heavy melee weapons such as, the giant swords and tetsubo and so on, they do still exist in this period, but they tend to be more individuals than in units. I have put pole arms and heavy melee weapons in there as a unit choice because some groups might have them, and particularly like Koreans and Chinese do. They're mostly useful, oddly enough, in rough terrain. People's imagery that they've got in their head that warrior monks and so on at this period use naginatas it's a lie. Sorry, this is painted in from later eras. There's no evidence that they used them more or less than any other troops. So it's an interesting period. There's these very interesting small unit tactics that were used, and hopefully this element system allows you to bring them in. So you can have horse archers at this period. They're definitely on the decline, but some people do have a few of them. So you can skirmish with your horse archers and do firing passes, racing past and shooting at the best possible moment. You've got cavalry armed with yari, who are more of a shock force. You've got the shock force of spear-armed troops. You've got the fire-armed troops. Armor is important. You can have bulletproof armor, which might force someone to pay the extra for the improved muskets. You've got your arrows and so on still being fired. You've got heroes and so on. Heroes and leaders, they add to the fighting power of units. You can also end up with heroes kind of dueling each other. If you've got an unattached hero and another unattached hero from the outside bumps into it, they end up fighting. If you beat someone in a duel, it gets some more victory points for your side. Keeping close track of who wins and loses the game. So you are starting off with a pile of victory tokens, and this is based on the forces that you have purchased. As your forces take reverses, you lose victory tokens from your pile of victory tokens. When that pile of victory tokens is gone, game over. Your side retreats. So trying to keep a very, very clear and easy way of marking. So for those, we'll probably use like counters that look like gold coins, those Japanese kind of gold coins. It's probably a great idea. There's a campaign system that I've put in it so that you can do sort of, instead of a hyper-focused kind of map-based campaign, this is abstracted. You've got people's territories and you work out who is neighbors with whom, and that shows who you can reach. And you have a track which sort of shows how your current status relates to those neighbors. You're either in balance and you have nothing particularly against each other. You've made inroads into the guy's territory, kind of deeper inroads into his territory, or their backs against the wall compared to you. You can pass troops through each other's territories. You can make alliances. You can seal those alliances by making victory points that you'll lose if you break the alliance. You can send people to help your allies. You can stab each other in the back. You can have a way old time. That's all in there. And as I said, there's also material in there for Korean troops, Ming troops, troops from Burma and Siam and Ayutthaya and from the Okinawan area, and Spanish, because they fought bitterly against the Spanish in the Philippines, and Filipino troops and so on as well. So lots of historical stuff there, notes sewn all through it, painting notes and so on, notes on armor colors, lacing colors, and some modeling things. It's a more diverse period than was advertised normally. See, in later periods, this whole neo-Confucian stuff came in, where women are put in their place and whatever. Not so during this period. There are just absolute bucket loads of female warriors and female leaders on record. Whole realms being run by female leaders. Some of these, so you can have a Bushidan that's led by women, or some of these hero and unit leaders and so on that you have, they can be female characters, which is great to model. Interesting enough for the trans, cross-dressing and gay communities out there, yes, Japan at the period is entirely bisexual. That's just seen as the normal way of life, and also a pansexual and sort of transsexual community is very, very strong. Most of the warlords at the period had what shall we call them, loyal pages. They're gay lovers who stay with them throughout their lives. Many of them also have essentially trans lovers, people of one sex that dress entirely as the other. So you will find them in prints. If you have a look, you'll see in someone's retinue, oh, there's someone in armor, but they're wearing essentially sleeves from a female garment. You can see they've got armor over female garments and this sort of stuff. That may not be a warrior woman. That may be a warrior, essentially what we would now think of as a trans person. There's also, I put information in there on the Catholic realms and Catholic societies, because you might have a Bushidan that's Catholic, and some of the non-European samurai and warriors from the period. Again, some of those hero figures, or your Bushidan, could be led by some of the interesting people. There were some samurai who were actually Korean from Joseon, a couple of Ming ones. There is quite famously an African gentleman who was one of Oda Nobunaga's main retainers. He was his personal sword bearer, like that close to the guy. He was either looks like he might have been Sudanese or Ethiopian. And very impressive to the locals. They said he was a man of incredibly fine character, well educated, Um, he was huge. They described him like huge as a bull and 6'2", which put him about a foot taller than the natives. Um, and of course, we do know about like some of the Dutch and English people, but they kept away from the action and so on. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting diversity in the period. Also, some notes there. I found some wonderful what would we call it? Period crimes against fashion. You know, the sashimono, the back flags that you'll always see if you watch a Kurosawa film. They look great. They add uniformity to a period where the armors are going to be completely non-uniform. Even like the foot soldiers, the Ashiguru, very few of these warlords could afford to just like make a uniform issue to people. There's tons in any given unit. There'll be tons of different types and styles of armor. So the Sashimono lets you know whose side they're on. But some individuals have some kind of wacky personal ones. Like if you're from a small family, or if you're like someone making a name for themselves, you'll have a personal Sashimono. Some of those are extraordinarily grotesque or just out and out weird. Or I like the corner cutting one. One guy he's just stuffed a whole bunch of green bamboo in the carrier. He just carries basically a bunch of bamboo. When he kills someone, he cuts their head off. He sticks a bamboo leaf in their mouth. Then, later on, when they're doing the whole showing a head ceremony, he's obviously had some problems in the past with someone nicking his heads. He's running around and opening all the mouths with witnesses, and if he finds someone's trying to like present a head or something, they've taken it as a bamboo leaf in it, he's got you. He knows you poached one of his heads. These people, really. Yes, so I have found some wonderful, appalling bits of fashion like that just to challenge figure converters and miniature painters out there. It's an interesting, colourful period, and the publishers are right. It has not really been given a proper set of rules that bring the flavour of it into play. So I'm really proud and pleased to have been asked to do this, and I think I'm doing a good job. I think I'm giving them something that is unique and has a Japanese flavor and isn't just yet another game. And it's got some good elements to this. I'd like to do some more for them. Like this would be, you could do a similar thing, for instance, for like heroic age Greece, Greeks versus Troy, chariot age sort of stuff as well. And in that case, you can bring, instead you dump the Japanese elements thing, but you can bring in like the influence of different gods. So, Apollo, Poseidon, these sorts of things. These are your fury and your cunning and your speed and your discipline. And so, I think there's some interesting resource management and force design. The other thing I really like about that whole Ryu design is that you're designing different styles of play for yourself. I feel like playing something cunning and full of tricks and ambushes. I feel like playing something that's full of like crazy spear wielding maniacs rampaging towards you. I feel like disciplined fire lines, holding their own. So it's got a lot of choices, and essentially no two games will play the same way twice if you vary your Ryu and play around with it. So anyway, that's what I've been up to on the miniatures game design wise. Helion books, I'm at the game playtesting stage now. I've written these things out, and yes, playing these things on tables to make sure I've got the distances right. Are they moving too far and shooting too far to fit comfortably on a table? Are the dice numbers that I'm giving things, is it giving you a result, or is it do I need to tweak them up or down a little so that things happen faster or slower? Those kind of little minor things as I come back and forth. So that's the stage we're in. I'll keep playing with these for the next little while, and we'll see what tweaks go in, and then I think we got us a game, and I think it's a good one. At the moment, the working title is Bushidan, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this out there. Helion are an excellent publisher. I respect them a lot, and really pleased to be working with them. Their editor, Charles, has been wonderful, and I'd love to meet him. We clearly live in sort of similar realms of historical enthusiasm. He's their early moderns editor, and so therefore, like, our love of samurai and English Civil War and 30 Years War and Venetian wars in Crete and so on. It's like this. And then as we start discussing things like, yes, we're both fascinated by ancient Egyptian chariots and Hurrimatanians and all these sorts of things. So I love wargamers. They are my people. Hopefully I'll be able to bring you up to speed on some of the role-playing stuff. I'm under NDA for a lot of the role-playing stuff. I'll see if they'll clear me to tell you guys more about that, and because there's some good stuff coming there, some good stuff from a good publisher. Anyway, I've rambled on enough. I will talk to you guys later on. Cheers.